Hey there, Shedsters. Thanks for joining me at the end of, well, for me, a very busy week. I had a fabulous time up in Yorkshire. I told you, didn't I, that I was going up to Yorkshire to Scargill House. Um, Fantastic location. I mean, I'm a big Yorkshire lover anyway, but Scargill House is in the most fantastic setting. And yeah, I was leading a retreat with a beautiful bunch of people. And then I have had a non-stop weekend down here in London. Gave a talk this morning at St Leonard's in Streatham on the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, which surely has to be a deeply relevant passage in the light of our economic situation here in the UK and the mini budget this week, which seems to be promising a trickle down for all the people at the bottom end. Something I have to say I've never really seen work in my life. And well, it definitely didn't work for Lazarus in the story. Anyway, if you want to hear a bit more about that, I'll be posting a link once it's available. So, you know what? Given my week, I'm just going to jump in today, say what I've got to say, and then clear off and have a lie down. If that's okay with you? I know that you'd have given me the week off, of course, but I've got some stuff that I really want to get off my chest. By the way, I will be returning to the topic I was talking about last time about progressive ways to read the Bible, but I'm just giving that a miss this week. Because basically, I was struck by an article in The Guardian this week based on a report by a Christian think tank called Theos, which the report looks at the likely results of the new census data on religion, which is due to be published by the end of the year. Very interesting. I mean, the Theos report basically concludes that people who identify as not religious, okay, people who in the census but not religious, tend to fall into three groups, which they call hardline, easygoing, and those who are spiritual while rejecting organized faith. Apparently, the census data is expected to show a further jump in the proportion of the population which describes itself as non-religious. So that's the way that the curve is going on that front. Census results for Northern Ireland are already published this week, showing an 80% increase. Now, it didn't say 18, I said shows an 80% increase in the number of people identifying as non-religious. And that's a growth in the kind of share of the population from 10% to 17% who describe themselves as non-religious. Data from the England and Wales 2021 census, due as I say before the end of the year, are expected to see the proportion of non-religious people rising to more than a third of the population. That's in England and Wales. In 2001, rather, in the 2001 census, the first time a question on religion was ever asked in the census, 15% of people ticked the box for non-religion. In 2011, it was 24%, and as I say, that's expected to rise up to a third. That said, opinion polls suggest an even higher proportion of people are non-religious. The 2018 British Social Attitude Survey found that 53% of respondents described themselves as non-religious. 53%. But Theos, and actually, I have to say, in a way, I'm surprised it isn't higher, but there you go. But Theos has examined closer the attitude of what they call nons. Okay, that's the non-religious people, people who tick non-religious. And it's interesting. They find that only about half, 51%, about half of those who identify as non-religious said that they don't believe in God. So it's all a little bit more complicated than it appears, isn't it? Half of the people who say they're non-religious, only about a half say that they don't believe in God. So non-religious clearly doesn't necessarily mean atheist. 20% actually say that they definitely or probably believe in life after death, which, yeah. And almost one in six, 17%, believe in the power of prayer. So, as I say, it's all really a little bit more complicated. And I'm sorry for showing all those percentages at you. There were three broadly equal sized clusters among the nons, the non religious people. They are number one, campaigning nons. It's okay. So these are people, these are the sort of hardliners, really, people who are hostile to religion. So for them, their nonness is part of their identity. They feel it strongly. Religion isn't something you simply don't belong to. It's something that you need to campaign against, which I guess is all in the general school of Richard Dawkins, the sort of more fundamentalist end. So that's one cluster of the nons. There's a second subgroup of nons designated as spiritual nons. And these were less atheistic, more spiritually open, according to Theos. I mean, they're saying, I don't belong to religion, but I believe stuff, and often I do stuff that's indistinguishable from the kind of stuff that religious people do. It's just that I don't want to, wear the badge. I don't want to wear the label. I don't want to belong to a particular institution. Um, and this is what I guess we often call the spiritual but not religious sector of people. Um, so, there's the kind of the hardliners, the campaigning ones, there's the sort of spiritual nons, and the third cluster they called the tolerant nons. I like the sound of them, tolerant nons. And these were generally atheistic, but more accepting of religion than the hardliners. Um, they don't see religion as evil, they're a bit more live and let live instead of being the sort of more fundamentalist kind of atheists. So these were people who Theos says, who on watching the Queen's funeral last week might have thought, I don't believe in all this, but I can see that there's merit in marking great moments of state or of life with ceremony. Linda Woodhead, who she's written, as a sociologist on these things for a long time now. She's the head of the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at King's College London, and she says that this year's census results would definitely continue the trend of more people identifying as non-religious and fewer identifying as Christian. So, as I say, I don't think that's any surprise to anybody, really. I mean, Linda Woodhead says the churches have basically failed dramatically as kind of moral or spiritual authorities in the country. With things like the abuse scandals in the church being, just one more big nail in the coffin. Um, there is currently a free for all in the area of values leadership, Linda Woodhead says. The Queen did an excellent job of becoming a values leader, which is why so many people, um, feel so good about her. But Linda Woodhead says, she's become a values leader of much greater stature than any Christian leader in the country, which yeah, it's worth thinking about. And I don't think it's a big surprise if you listen to an awful lot of what people were saying, in that period around her death and funeral. Speaking of which, I was deeply moved, really, and intrigued by the massive queues to see the Queen's coffin. Um, I don't know many people who want to queue for more than a couple of hours, even to, get tickets for a gig. I mean, maybe Glastonbury, but 11, 12, 15, 24 hours. I mean, that is a real phenomenon. Whatever you think about it, it's a phenomenon, and I'm pretty sure that those long snaking lines of people will be one of the iconic images that we'll all remember in days to come of this particular period. And personally, I'm not convinced it was necessarily anything to do with attitudes about monarchy. As I said on Facebook and on Pause for Thought, I'm not personally much of a monarchist. I'm not much of a Republican. Although, given recent polling habits in this country and elsewhere, uh, I'm not feeling very enthusiastic about the public voting for a president or the like. Just saying. But no, I think that the lines suggested something quite different going on than just about monarchy and royalty and all that. I think that we witnessed in those long lines of people nothing less than pilgrimage for a hell of a lot of people. A form of secular spirituality. The images in Westminster Hall struck me as, yes, a very real love and respect for the late Queen, but also I sense a great longing for ritual. I mean, that image of the coffin in the hall was, on one level, it was almost like an art installation. There was something of beauty about it. But I think, listening to the people who came out, and I actually wish I'd been able to go, I just couldn't do it. But listening to people who came out, I think that the whole experience of that long process of walking and then entering into this quite sacred space and the sense of silence and yeah, reverence there, which I say is not necessarily at all to do with royalty, so you don't have to get your knickers in a twist about that if you're likely to. I think it's saying that something else is going on here. And I think it has to do with spirituality. I think that is not finding any valid outlet. And I think it has to do with the place of ritual too, in a world that increasingly has sort of shoved that out to the margins. I've said many times, I believe that people are no less spiritual today than they ever have been, but they are certainly a whole lot less religious. And, there's a whole loss of interest in formal or institutional religion. I mean, I'm sure loads of people watched the funeral service and, enjoyed or were impressed by the whole setting. I mean, the building, Westminster Abbey, is astonishing. Um, the phenomenal music and the whole ritual of the whole thing. I'm sure there were lots of people watching it who enjoyed that and were impressed by it. Maybe thought that the church does a pretty good job of this, but I can't see any of that leading to swarms of folk filing up to get into church anytime soon. The point is, a disconnect has occurred in recent decades, maybe over a longer period, it's over a very long period probably, but we're seeing it very evident now. A disconnect has occurred between religion and spirituality. Most people no longer see religion or church as a natural or appealing way to explore their spiritual longings or aspirations. It does not necessarily mean that they no longer believe in God. The census seems to be suggesting that, but they're not attracted to the God of institutional religion. And I think that is something that's well worth noting. And I have to say, it really doesn't help when we read in the news, as we have this week, things like Desmond Tutu's daughter, a South African Anglican priest, being refused permission by the Diocese of Hereford to officiate at her godfather's funeral because she's married to a woman. I mean, it's not a great look in this day and age, to say the very, very least. More than that, it's a bloody injustice, actually, and a piece of monumental inhumanity. Um, and I know, I've read the Bishop of Hereford's reply, and I know that the diocese is trying to follow Church of England rules. But if this is what the rules say, it's time some people started just ignoring them. And I think it would have been fantastic if the diocese had done that. And probably, no one would have noticed, because who in their right mind would have thought that, Desmond Tutu's daughter, a beautiful and wonderful woman in her own right, would be refused the opportunity to conduct the funeral of her godfather, 92-year-old man, I think, who she and her wife went to see a few months ago, and he specifically requested that she take the funeral. I mean, I think for a lot of people in the church, they're a bit shocked about that. But, the wider population, for me, the current data being published just underlines in thick marker pen our desperate need for more progressive forms of faith. My personal anecdotal experience is that among those two clusters of nons, the spiritual and the tolerant non religious types, there are hordes of people who are actually not, shutters pulled down. They're open to faith, but open to kinds of faith which are non-dogmatic, which are inclusive, which are affirming of people's spiritual experiences and understandings outside of the church. And I think that is, it certainly forms a huge part of my personal audience. It's those kind of people that I feel I'm often speaking to when I speak to millions of people on Radio 2 on Pause for Thought. It's the people I write for very often, and so on. To use the language of the business world, I believe churches need to position themselves, reposition themselves actually, in what's often called the service sector. We have services, right? But seriously, what I mean is that the church needs to stop giving the impression that it will just keep ploughing on regardless of what people think about it or how many people are walking away from it, without paying, genuine attention to what so-called outsiders, potential customers, to use business language, are looking for or need, without valuing their experiences of God or spirituality too. My daughter, my oldest daughter Jenny, she works for the John Lewis Partnership. She's worked there for all of her working life since she left school. And that is such an incredible, it's often spoken of as a benchmark, isn't it? But it's such a beautiful example, really, of a business that seems to get it right in terms of the way it treats people inside, of the way it sort of listens to people, to the customer market. And I think, it's crude language, guys, but with the best will in the world, if we open our doors on a Sunday and want people to come in, they are potential customers. And I think that we can learn a hell of a lot from the service sector about this. There are so many just diabolical examples that I could cite, of people being treated dreadfully when they've come looking for something. I used to say, as the vicar of St. Luke's, I want to be the vicar of a church that likes to say yes, that wherever possible says yes. Whereas so often you get the impression that the church is just entrenched in saying no, whatever the issues may be. I sometimes think, to picture it this way, I sometimes think that churches operate a bit like antiquated shops. You see them sometimes on streets, don't you? When you walk down, you just see this, you think, oh my goodness, it's still in the Dickensian era, this shop here. I sometimes feel church operates like these antiquated shops, with goods in the window that people neither understand, are attracted to, or want. And then, we grumble that no one's interested in what's on offer. Everyone's turning away from God and so on. Rubbish, I say. I'm convinced that there is plenty of spiritual hunger and aspiration out there, plenty of interest in God, actually. But churches too often are encrusted in their own subculture of archaic practices, beliefs, and attitudes, and notions of God that can't possibly fit with, like 21st century cosmology. Basically, we need another Reformation. That's what I believe. We need another Reformation, a root and branch rethink of our theology, our spirituality, and our vision of what a church might look like for today's postmodern pilgrims. I know, that's what we need, because I think the pilgrims are out there. Honestly, it's not about making existent doctrines and beliefs more relevant. I hate that word relevant when it's used in the context of church thinking about its mission in the world. It's not relevance that we need. It's not about more, slick forms of evangelism and advertising, better posters, get on TV or whatever. It's not about swapping Victorian hymns and church organs for worship songs and basically soft rock bands. It's not about replacing vestments with chinos and sweaters. This is not where it's at. I think you can be connecting with people in a profoundly, life-affirming, useful way, wearing vestments, whereas you can be utterly alienating in chinos and a sweater and all of that stuff. It's much more, actually about a genuine dialogue, a conversation with the contemporary world, the world of thought and art and science, of social sensibilities and spiritual aspirations. More than all this, I think that we need a much bigger understanding of God's Spirit at work in the world, instead of just seeing, that in the church. A much more, what I would call, immanential theology, which means a theology of divinity penetrating human culture as well as nature. In theological terms, there's been, this classic tension between what we call transcendence and immanence. Transcendence is when we think of God transcending everything, being outside and other, elsewhere, and immanential is thinking of the divine embedded in the natural world. And I think, I do believe in a tension between the two, but I think the balance has been, way, way over on the transcendental level. And what we need is a much more immanential theology, a theology, as I say, of divinity penetrating human culture as well as nature. And we need to listen to people instead of always speaking at them and expecting them to, sit up and be impressed, because you know what? They're not. And I don't think they're likely to be if we carry on in that way. I've found conversations with non-religious people, as well as people of other faiths, to be, profoundly stimulating and enlightening. I've learned so much from talking to people of other faiths on faith, dialogue panels. I've also learned a great deal about God and about faith from people in pubs sometimes after funerals, or wherever, who are people with no particular faith. And my theology of God's Spirit, as being present and active in non-religious people's experience, as well as that of the church, or church people, this underscores why I expect to find divine revelation out there in the world, in the so-called secular world, as well as among fellow Christians. Basically, at present, I think very often our God is way, way, way too small. So I am actually in no way depressed by data which suggests that people are becoming less religious. I can see that and feel it every day anyway. Actually, I find many church people, people that I meet in churches and places that I go to speak, many church people are less convinced of the old dogmas and beliefs, which I think is all to the good. My real concern is how are we going to move forward into a brave new age of faith and spiritual practice. It's time to progress and not to keep harking back, As the social commentator Stephen Toulmin wonderfully said in one of his books, we have a choice between two attitudes toward the future. It's a choice between imagination and nostalgia, between facing the future and backing into it. Now, Toulmin wasn't writing this about the church or about the religious domain. He was writing this about, society in general and moving forward in the 21st century. But if it's true of society in general, which I believe it is, I think that all across the world, these so-called populist movements, retrograde sort of political stances, make America great again, Great Britain, and all these things, I think are really locked into a form of nostalgia. And I see no future other than hostility down that road. This is a choice between imagination and nostalgia, between facing the future courageously or just backing into it. And that backing into it, suggests straight away we can't get away from the future, we're going there. But how are we going to go there? Are we going to go there facing this brave new world of faith and hope, looking it full in the face, engaging with it, embracing what's coming and engaging our faith with it? Or are we going to back into it, harking back to, some kind of good old days? And there, in this statement by Stephen Toulmin, is the basis of a progressive faith right there, I think. It's there. I take it. Okay, so more of this next time. For the moment, let's just finish with a prayer. God of all creation, whose joyful whisper is heard in the sweet melodies of a humble dunnock, whose assurance embraces each day in the faithfulness of sunrise. We give thanks for our brother Jesus, one free as the wind, who would not be trapped by religious dogma or the results of other people's thinking. We are grateful for his liberating support of the little and the least, the struggling and the rejected, and people like ourselves who hold hard questions for life and faith. Today we raise a glass to the God we cannot escape, whose presence fills the whole earth, who is disclosed in the tiniest creature and in the majesty of a billion stars. We raise a glass to the God revealed in a frail human who travelled through deathliness and showed us the way into passionate life. We raise a glass to the divine spirit, infusing every atom with worth and purpose, and forever breathing us, mere humans, and an entire planet into daily new birth. Amen. Good show. Let's drink to that, shall we? And I don't think there's anything more to say. It's all in the prayer, really. I think all that's left for us to do is turn our faces to the future and not to the past, and to, with hope in our heart, sounds like a song at a Liverpool match now, but with hope in our heart, to go forward courageously, looking for a new reformation that will bring to birth the presence of God in new and fresh ways that will, help to create the sort of world that we all long for. So, hey, guys, to life, L'chaim. Well, there it is. If you like what I'm doing here in the shed, you can support us. Buy us a coffee or two. There is the link on your screen, and it's always at the top of the posts on the Holy Shed Facebook page. Hey, thanks so much for all your love and support in so many ways to us. It is so much appreciated. And there it is. I'm going to finish with a little video, actually, because one of the things that we need to be reminded of, I think, is that it's not just us, Christians or church people who are struggling with this whole thing of a longing for a faith that's progressing and sometimes being tugged back by a retrograde form of faith. It's happening in the world in general. It's what many of the struggles in our world are about. It's also happening in other faith communities. We don't often think of Islam as having very much by way of progressive movements within their midst, but actually there are plenty of Muslims whose hearts are looking for a way forward. Maybe they face challenges and difficulties that we don't. Maybe we face some that they don't. But this is a video about the Ibn Rushd Mosque in Berlin, which is it's a mosque which bans, not just discourages, bans face covering for women. It allows women and men to pray together, and it accepts and welcomes openly LGBT worshippers. And I think it's a pretty impressive initiative, and I think you'll enjoy watching this. So have a look, and thanks for being here with me today. Have a great week. Be kind. This is an age when we need a lot more kindness. Be kind to those around you. Be kind always to yourselves, because that's the basis from which we can be kind to other people. Stay human, and I will see you very soon. Bye-bye.
When you can start developing feelings for others, that's when I knew that I was gay. In Islam, it was for me very clear that homosexuality is bad, and I thought by praying to God, I could cure myself to become normal. Being gay is really hard in this when you are religious, when your family is traditional. When my little sister was born, I just wanted to hold her buggy and walk with her. And then my father slapped my hand and said, "Stop doing that, that's gay." And then I thought, okay, so being gay is really bad. And I was just struggling between being a normal 15, 14, 16 years old guy in Germany and being really religious. I had, friends who were like really, really radical extremists even, who they considered going to Syria or going to Palestine to fight the Jews. So I started thinking about it too. I always thought when I die in Syria it wasn't suicide, then I would be a shaheed and I would go to the best place in paradise while being gay. That's the time when I found a liberal news network from the United States. It's called The Young Turks. That was really good for me because then I just, came down a bit, and I was really happy that this mosque then was founded.
We're the only inclusive mosque in Berlin and in Germany probably. We have LGBT people here who cannot go anywhere else. They come here to pray with us. And we understand ourselves as humans and do not care whether we're men or women. So we're inclusive in all ways.
Conservative people think that there is no homosexuality in their country. There is no homosexuality in Islam, and there is no homosexuality in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Turkey, but there is. Everyone knows there is, and they're just hiding themselves.
De-radicalization is important to us because there is a movement towards radicalization in Germany, in the German mosques. And we need to counter that by opening up people's minds towards a more liberal understanding of Islam.
It doesn't make any sense to just listen to this one group that tells you that you are going to hell. Because this mosque fights for LGBT rights, it definitely helped me to de-radicalize completely and just be a happy human being without any hatred.